Well, hey guys, welcome to a new year with Hope Rescue Podcast. It's Tim and Kim. Here we are, same people, same place.
Just a year older.
A year and a week and a half or so.
Yeah, well, a week.
Yeah.
We're in the second week, so
Yeah.
it's good to have you with us for 2023.
It is.
And, before the end of the year, we took a break for 3 weeks for Christmas, New Year's break, holiday break. And we were talking about shame, and we're going to pick that up.
Yes, we are. And now that we're a week and a half or so into the new year, we have a testimony on it.
With lots
we were
of shame.
building our
Lots
testimony through the holidays.
Is that eating shame? Is that what you're referring to? I don't want to even say. I weighed myself this morning, and
You do
okay.
every morning, though. So.
Yeah, I did, but things weren't looking. Things were looking up.
Well, here's the thing: is
You know what I mean? On that scale.
That's actually a very common, obviously, trend that we set new bars, new goals into the new year. And actually, I have a new friend that I met this last year at our Leading and Loving It conference, which is for women in leadership. And she's an author and she's also a podcaster. Her name is Jess Connolly. Probably some of you have heard of her. She's amazing. And she wrote a post at the beginning of the year that was so profound to me. And if you don't mind, I want to take a minute to read it because it's so directly related to shame. Let me pull it up here. Actually, the post said this: don't start your new year with shame. And then she goes and breaks it down. And here we go. It says, I love goals as much as the next girl, maybe more. But I hate that the enemy of our souls has co-opted this holiday so that it's normal for us to walk into every new year with so much shame. We've disappointed in our bodies, our finances, our families. We're frustrated with our current selves, and so we want to be new versions, different people, disjointed from our need and flesh and failing. Maybe you've already written goals, or maybe you've written off the entire endeavor because you're tired of letting yourself down. Wherever you land, can I invite you, implore you even, to start this year motivated by how much you're loved and seen by God? I love that. If you want to shift the way you move and eat, can I entice you to take the time to let it be based in your worship and not your shame? If you want to change your schedule or rhythms, maybe it's worth your time also to choose gratitude for how far the old ones brought you. Don't start your new year with shame. It's loud, discouraging, defeating, and it seems fun to dance with, but always leaves us feeling that much more broken. Let's start our new year in awe of God. Let's start our new year with hope in the growth that comes from abiding. Let's start our new year with our eyes wide open to our need for the gospel. Let's start our new year with truth, beauty, and freedom. But shame, no thank you. Let's leave that behind in 2023. Isn't that good?
Yeah, it's really appropriate for what we've been talking about.
It's so appropriate. Thank you, Jess.
Those of you, who were listening last year, and those of you joining us just this year, you may want to go back and get the first two episodes on shame. We really kind of deep dive into the psychology of shame, but it's also a spiritual reality. What your friend shared there on that post was, a shame motivator is usually a mistake. Sometimes we feel guilt and that, drives us to make the changes that are necessary. But shame usually takes us to the wrong place.
It does.
Because it's a
Eventually.
fear-based, that sense of exposure. In fact, this is what we said, just kind of review a little bit what we shared last time. Shame is complex exposure of weakness and sins the shamed in many different directions because it causes a cognitive shock reaction. This is from Dr. Nathanson's book, in which he shares about what he calls the compass of shame. And in that, he talks about how when you have shame, you go into 4 different directions. We're going to unpack that in a minute, which causes us to seek mitigation of shame's focus on our lives. So what happens is when we feel shame, when we feel guilt, we adjust. Either we rebel and continue in the bad behavior, or we submit and we change and we move forward with a better alternative future. But shame just keeps us stuck. And what
Yes.
we do is we begin to lash out at self and to others. And that's what
Right, right.
Dr. Nathanson's book really dealt with. And it's in the compass of shame. We talked about this spotlight. Why don't you share a little bit
Yeah,
about
well,
that?
it talks. It's our unique way of being able to escape the spotlight that we feel is focused on our weakness. That's what shame is.
Yeah.
On our failure or our deficiencies, which we all have. And shame attempts to change the view of the onlooking world. So it's all about how people see us
Yeah.
and how we see ourselves.
Yeah. So guilt says, I need to change something. I've done something wrong. Shame, we've shared this before. Shame says, I am wrong. When you start with that identity of shame, where you are wrong, there's something deficient in you, not that you did something inappropriate, but I am deeply flawed, you're usually going to go in the wrong directions. And Dr. Nathanson said there are 4 ways that we go. This spotlight, this is what happens. We all love a spotlight when we're doing something good. When you're dancing really well, which that has not happened very often in my life.
On your clock or mine.
Yeah. There are times where I thought I was dancing well, and then somebody had a camera on me, and I'm like, okay, I need to settle that down. But anyway, if you're doing something that is really excellent, you're in your prime singing or dancing or, even your leadership or whatever you're really good at, we want a spotlight. But when you do something that is inappropriate or flawed in some way, you don't want a spotlight on it, because the spotlight shining
Right.
on your deficiencies and your weaknesses,
Exposure.
your failures, what that does, it exposes you, and you then change your view of yourself.
Right.
And so Dr. Nathanson said, of the 4, the first one is we withdraw. And the problem with withdrawal, wow, that's hard to say 2 words the same. With withdrawal, the problem with withdrawal is that we have a tendency then to be alone, and maybe from some of the most important people in our lives.
Yeah.
And so when we're isolated or alone, it presents this problem of disconnectedness.
Right.
And how are you going to grow if you're disconnected?
Right. And then the natural next step would be that you attack yourself because you've isolated.
Yeah.
And, we know that words are powerful, and the words that we don't even speak out of our mouth, we're saying to ourselves in our mind and to ourselves, and we reduce ourselves. We say to ourselves, I'm unworthy or I'm wrong. Negative self-talk is so toxic and destructive when we isolate.
So the first one is we withdraw from others. The second one, as Kimberly just said, is attacking ourself and reducing ourself. The third is avoidance. So it sounds like withdrawal, but avoidance is a little bit different. Avoidance is not that we're just withdrawing, but what we're doing is distracting. So we're distracting ourselves through substance abuse, deviant sexual behavior, eating disorders, compulsive exercise, shopping,
Et
over
cetera.
shopping, and all of the things we do to just kind of medicate
Right.
our pain. And that's avoidance. We're avoiding that spotlight by ignoring that it exists. And it works temporarily while you're under the influence of that substance, or you're in that euphoria of
Dopamine
something.
flush.
You just you have the dopamine flush when you buy something new,
Right.
and it feels good for a while, but then comes flooding back in this spotlight on your life. So those are the first 3. What's the 4th?
Right. And then this is also just so destructive and toxic is number 4 is we attack others, typically the ones we love the most because they're in closest proximity, but we reduce them. It can come down to domestic violence, which we've seen a lot of, unfortunately, on the news through the holidays, bullying, destruction of property, for kids, there's graffiti, vandalism, theft. The list goes on.
Yeah, and think about this. When you do, like, for example, graffiti, you're destroying somebody else's property to prop yourself up. You're reducing them to prop yourself up. Now, graffiti could be that you're tagging something. Gangs do this. They tag it, and they've got a different motive. They're saying, this is my territory, stay out. But then there also is this kind of, when we reduce others, what we're doing is we're trying to increase ourselves past that spotlight. There has never been anybody that has been involved in domestic violence or bullying or reducing others that doesn't have shame. People sometimes people think that, somebody who's a bully or somebody who is abusing their spouse has power. Actually, what they do is they're very weak and wounded, and they are attacking from their woundedness.
Finding a target for the woundedness.
Yeah, somehow that makes me feel better about myself. Well, here's an interesting thing. God deals with Adam and Eve, and we promised at the end of last show, we were going to talk about the genesis of shame. Where did it first start? Who's the first person to feel shame?
Right.
And the answer is not you. You sometimes we feel like we're the only ones that feel this. Nobody else feels the intensity of worthlessness or aloneness or whatever your thing is. It actually started all the way back with the first two humans. Right. And, so let's go back to Genesis to talk about the genesis of shame.
Yeah, so in Genesis 2:25, from the get-go, it says, and the man and his wife, which we know as Adam and Eve, were both naked and were not ashamed. So things were fine.
Yeah, so the original created condition,
right?
Adam and Eve, naked. They're always naked.
Naked.
What are you going to wear today?
Right.
What I got on, that's nothing.
This is it.
That was.
And I'm good.
Yeah, and the weather was such that it was
perfect temperature.
Really very beautiful temperature. San Diego.
Think of yourself on a tropical island with a nudist beach, and everybody's just feeling fine.
Well, there's only two, but it's a good thing because, but we associate nakedness with shame,
right?
And some things about that are valid and so forth, but they were naked and they felt no shame. Now, that doesn't mean they weren't sexually attracted to each other. They were. In fact, they had been commanded to multiply on the earth, and they were to have children. There was that sexual attraction that was there, but they didn't have shame associated with sex or nakedness.
Right. And something happened in Genesis 3:3. It says this, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. So he put a boundary there in the middle of the garden. This is the one thing. Yeah,
and also there's a consequence. What's the consequence?
Well,
you're going to die.
You're going to die.
And actually, they eventually died physically, but that very moment, that they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the consequence that God had warned them was, you will die. And they died that very day. Spiritually and psychologically, their whole world had been
by partaking of the fruit.
Because they disobeyed.
They stepped into disobedience and began to experience the pain of shame.
Yeah. And shame does some crazy things. Let's notice what it does to them. This is the first thing they do. Genesis 3:7. So this is after they sinned. You remember before that, they had no shame about their nakedness. They had just a beautiful relationship. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. So that doesn't mean that they go, oh, wait a minute, you're naked. I see your body. Well, of course, Adam saw her body and was attracted to her. She saw Adam's body and she was attracted to his money.
His money.
Wait a minute. Oh, sorry. And so they were attracted to each other, but now they know their nakedness and they knew they were naked. And what that means is, look at the context. And they sewed fig leaves together and made for themselves loincloths. So they covered their loins with cloth because now they feel their nakedness and shame associated with that. Today, instead of, the fig leaves, we might say, someone goes
Stretchy
to
pants.
stretchy pants. Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to go there, but
Well, that's
that works.
half my wardrobe.
Yeah.
Although I will say this, and this is not too far off topic. This last Christmas, all of our sons are working out, and the whole trend now for workout wear is leisure wear. So it's more of a comfortable. Everything has a stretch, and so even though you're working out, you have room to go up and down on the scale, which is ideal.
So much room for activities.
It all started in the garden.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Fig leaf wear.
Okay, so today we would call it like something we might cover ourselves, the avoidance.
Yeah.
The avoidance might be substance abuse or eating disorders or sexual deviancy. What they did, their avoidance was that they covered themselves. So, okay, now we'll be okay. We won't have to see the nakedness. We won't have to see something that makes us feel shame that there's something wrong with us. Well, something had gone wrong. So, Dr. Nathanson's view that there are 4 ways that we deal with the spotlight of shame. We'll share this. The avoidance for Adam and Eve was they covered themselves with fig leaves.
Right. And then the next step, sadly, was withdrawal. And in Genesis 3:8, it says, "And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden." And so there was a physical withdrawal from the presence of God. This presents a spiritual and psychological problem for man, and man can't survive alone because we were created to need our Creator. I mean, to be in relationship with our Creator.
We're worshipers, aren't we?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, a real practical example would be in today's standards, folks often that are homeless or are down and out, that can be driven by shame, they often withdraw from society completely and find their own community in that that being away from people that hold them to a different standard.
Yeah, people wonder, how do we deal with homelessness? And these right now, homelessness is at an all-time high. I don't think I've ever seen homelessness like it is today. Driving through L.A., Kimberly and I, not too long ago, it's been a year or so ago, we were driving through L.A. on 101, I believe it was, and along the freeway, almost the whole way going through L.A., it's tent camps all over the place. We look down side streets, we see tent camps. Now in San Diego, it's like that. In San Francisco, it's like that. In Portland, in Seattle, all along the West Coast, and then even in New York and across the eastern seaboard, there are homelessness is just everywhere. And the way that you deal with homelessness is connection. And how you get to connection is a very difficult problem because you've got substance abuse,
people in avoidance,
people that have avoidance, and then people that have withdrawn
because of shame.
But what Adam and Eve did was they withdrew from God, the very source of their healing. So they hide from each other through avoidance, and then they withdraw from God, the place where they could be healed.
Right.
And then the third area is attacking self. And Genesis 3:9 says, "But the Lord God called a man and said to him, 'Where are you?'" Those are the most beautiful words of hope. The first time hope is brought into the human experience, man failed, and for the first time he needs hope, and God says, "Where are you?" The reconnection with God begins at that statement. And when you say to somebody who's walked away from God or walked away from a relationship, "Where are you?" and you say that in a safe and a loving way, I got to tell you, that is the word. Those are the words of hope. That's what changes lives. He goes on.
It's being pursued and pursuing them in the garden.
Pursued by the one you transgressed against, which is powerful. When someone you have failed, when someone you have harmed, and they say, "Where are you?"
Safely pursues you, lovingly pursues you.
Verse 10 says, "And he said, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." Why was he afraid? Shame had flooded the heart of Adam, and he said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." There's something, I'm flawed, I'm ruined, I'm devastated by, I'm unworthy, I'm nothing. And there is an incredible skill of God in chasing the heart of Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3. If you want to know how to deal with people, and all you have in the Bible is Genesis chapter 3, it gives a beautiful way. He exposed their sin in a loving, safe environment. He gave them a way for them to not only deal with their shame, but to resolve their shame, not by covering it, but by the sacrifice of an animal that covered their nakedness with animal skins. So it is a beautiful way that God redeems this terrible situation.
Yeah. And then the final thing is that happens in this list is like kind of goes back to the other point is we attack others. And Genesis 3:12 is such a great example of that because Adam says basically, the woman whom you gave to me to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree and I ate. So instantly it becomes a blame game, attacking those around you to deflect and to defer from our own, shame in our part in the process and our own sin.
I've heard preachers, joke about that. And, I'm like, okay, dude, blame if
That
it wasn't
woman.
for the women. Yeah, that woman, and actually it's not really the woman. Adam made a decision to consciously, Eve was deceived. She was genuinely deceived.
By the best deceiver ever,
Yes.
which was Satan himself.
Right. And if it hadn't been Eve, I'll just say it would have been me. I would have been deceived. So, but Adam consciously knew what he was doing was wrong, but he did it anyway. So now, dealing with shame here in 2023, in a few weeks, we're going to start a new series called Knowing the Will of God. And we really want to get into that, but we want to spend the next couple of weeks talking about shame. In the next podcast, next week, we're going to talk about the different levels of shame. Shame isn't like a light switch, which I'll explain next week. It's not a toggle switch. It's either on or off. There are degrees. It's like a light switch that has a brightness.
Right. That's a good example.
And you can fade up,
Intensity.
fade down. Yeah. And that intensity affects that person's psychology and spiritual standing, and how you deal with them is really important. So let me just give a pitch for next week for you to come back. If you have children or grandchildren, if you have a husband or a wife, if you have friends, co-workers, you're going to need to know how to deal with shame. Just recently, I was called into I'm going to be really vague here, into a situation where I had to resolve some shame issues, and the people didn't know they had shame. And I had to skillfully go in and not say, I know you have a bunch of shame, because it wasn't a Christian environment, it's a secular environment. But to deal with this skillfully is my calling, and it's your calling. And if you love people well, you're going to have to understand those degrees of shame. So we'll talk about that next week. So thankful you're back with us on 2023.
We're glad to be back.
This is going to be a great year.
It is.
It's going to be the turnaround year for a lot of you.
A no shame year.
I'm not a prophet, but I'll tell you, I've read a few. But I tell you, this is going to be a great year for you. And just commit your ways to the Lord and see what incredible year 2023 is. God bless you. We'll see you next week. We'll talk a little bit more about shame and how to deal with people with shame. God bless.
Bye, guys.